We believe we have a mandate to bring godly change to our nation and the world through the 7 spheres or mountains of influence. Welcome to the Truth and Liberty broadcast, brought to you by 7M Ventures and Andrew Wommack Ministries.
Hello, this is Andrew Wommack, and welcome to our Truth and Liberty live cast. And I tell you tonight, I believe this is going to really be good. You know, we have viewers from all over the world, and many of you may be somewhat disinterested in what's happening in the U.S. But I tell you, there's some things happening that are horrific, and I think really that this is going to wind up being good for us because it has awakened a sleeping giant.
Yes.
People are finally realizing we've got to do something. So anyway, what's happening here will affect people all over the world, and we got a great guest with us tonight. I'll be introducing her in just a little bit, but I'm going to turn it over to Conrad, and she's going to be telling you how you can get involved, ask questions, and also we've got a book giveaway, just all kinds of things.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Welcome, everybody. We are so glad that you joined us tonight. And we've got some great information that we're planning to share with you. As Andrew mentioned, this is an interactive live cast. That's what makes this so unique. We want to hear from you, and we want to get your questions. And so I want to encourage you that if you've got questions and you're watching on social media, you can go ahead and enter those questions in on the comment section. And we've got a whole team that's standing by, and they'll send those questions to us. But also, we have been censored once in a while on Facebook. And so what we want to let you know is that if you want to make sure you can watch this in its entirety, go to truthandliberty.net. And that's a website that we can control. Plus, we've got all the archives. We've got the information on there, articles that Richard puts together. And if you are watching on that website or awmi.net, you can enter those questions in the chat section, and we look forward to hearing from you on that.
And we were just told by someone today that the Truth and Liberty website has been redone, and they were complimenting that it's much easier to find things. So if you haven't visited it in a while, go check it out.
Yeah, great, Andrew. Thank you. Also, I just want to let you know about some events that are coming up. It seems like we've always got so much going on here. It's such an exciting ministry to be a part of. And so we've got Andrew, you're heading to Orlando tomorrow.
I am.
And so we've got the Gospel Truth Conference, and there's still time to register. You can go to awmi.net, and you are there with Dwayne Sheriff.
And he is awesome.
He is awesome.
He's one of the best ministers in the body of Christ today. It's really good.
You will be blessed. So if you're in the Orlando area, make sure that you get there. It's at the Hilton Orlando. Also, we've got the men's advance coming up on March 14th through the 16th. And we've got Tony Dungy and James Brown. And I saw Stephen was down at the Super Bowl with those guys.
He's doing interviews, and JB has been doing interviews with a lot of the coaches and players and stuff. And so we'll be putting out programs on that soon.
It's going to be great. And those programs are going to be on gospeltruth.tv, which is our 24/7 internet television channel. And we call it Andrew and Friends. And if you've not seen gospeltruth.tv, please check it out. I was watching it over the weekend. I'll tell you, the quality of the ministry on there is amazing. So you'll want to make sure that you check out gospeltruth.tv. Also, we have got Charis Bible College Campus Days. They're coming up on April 3rd to the 5th. And so if you are interested in Charis or just have some questions that you want answered, come on out and you can register at campusdays.org. And we've got David, King of Jerusalem, back by popular demand on April 12th to the 13th, just one weekend before Easter. It is Broadway quality.
It really is.
Oh, my goodness. You will want to bring friends, bring family. Do you know, sometimes people for Easter, they might not want to go to church, but they will go to something like this, and they will definitely get the gospel.
Those are the CEO Christians. Christmas, Easter, and occasionally.
That's great, Andrew. And as Andrew mentioned too, we have a giveaway every week. And to be eligible to win that giveaway, all you have to do is register at truthandliberty.net, and you can subscribe. Then you hear about our upcoming guests, and you'll be automatically put in a drawing. And last week, we want to congratulate Liz Robbins. Liz, you won Andrew's book, A Better Way to Pray, one of my absolute favorite books of yours, Andrew. You say that they'll either love it, it'll make them mad. bad.
That's true. You will not be indifferent after reading that book.
That's true. And today we're giving away Andrew's God Wants You Well. So please register, and we are so excited about these giveaways.
Yes.
Also, Richard does a lot of work every week. You know, he puts together articles. And so you've got some good articles in here, and they can find those at truthandliberty.net. And one of the things that we've added is a news feed.
A news feed, right.
So you can keep up to date on everything. So also, I just want to mention that this is a viewer-supported live cast. So if this is a blessing to you and God's put on your heart to donate towards this, please go to truthandliberty.net and click on donate, or you can call our phone center at 719-635-1111.
And also, I want to introduce Richard over here in case some of you, this is your first time you viewed or something, and he's our in-house lawyer. And he was with me today. We were strategizing how to deal with some bills. And I tell you, what a blessing you are, Richard, and a resource. And he's also warning me about how I can get in trouble for all the things I'm saying. And you know, I'm just, whether it's good or bad, I'm candid. And I don't know how to hide my feelings. And if I think something's wrong, I'm just going to say, how dumb can you get and still breathe? It's just, so Richard kind of keeps me in line. Amen.
You're a blessing.
So you're a blessing.
Thank you.
And tonight we want to introduce Kristan, and I just forgot your
Hawkins.
name. Hawkins. I just forgot her last name. I was just talking to her. But anyway, Kirstan Hawkins, and she was with us during what we call the event. It was on November the 4th, and it was in preparation for the 2018 midterm elections. And she is the president of Students for Life of America. And I tell you, I was so impressed with you, Kristan. You just got up and hit it out of the park talking about the abortion issue. So I'm sure you deal with many things, but this primarily is a pro-life organization. Could you just give us a little bit of information about what Students for Life is?
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me on tonight to talk about our ministry and everything that's going on across the country. Students for Life is the nation's largest pro-life youth organization. Our goal is to go to colleges and high school campuses right where the abortion industry is targeting for business, and to mobilize and train those young people to stand up and to speak out. They can transform our culture. And we know in so many things, you know, we have to transform our culture if we want to end abortion in our lifetime, make it, you know, unthinkable, and to make it illegal. We have to start with those who form culture, and that's young people. And they can go to their peers and talk to their peers about the truth about abortion, the grim reality that is abortion, the abortion industry. And they can also offer tangible support to those on their campus right there who are in crisis.
And so you took over, or you started working for Students for Life in 2006, and how have you seen things change since 2006? Just what's that, 13 years? What's happened in the last 13 years?
12 and a half years, and a lot of things have changed. I have a lot more gray hair. I had zero gray hair when I started. My daughter was crying today asking when her gray hair was going to come in. We started Students for Life really with the idea to go on the offensive. Instead of waiting for pro-life students to find us simply on the website or Facebook page, to go out and find students. I started a pro-life group in my high school. I started a pro-life group in my college. And for most of the time, I always felt like I was alone. I was always kind of recreating the wheel, trying to figure out how to win students over and to give their most precious asset, their time, to this cause that really wasn't going to make them very popular or very well liked on their campuses. And so when we started Students for Life, the goal was to, you know, kind of go like a political campaign approach. Go, instead of door knocking, we just walk up to students who are headed into the cafeteria for lunch or dinner, asking them their thoughts about abortion, saying, what do you think about abortion? Do you want to join us in this, the world's greatest human rights fight to end it? And so that's what we started doing 12 and a half years ago, is just going to campuses, starting groups, When we launched, we thought there were about 180 existing campus pro-life groups across the country. In reality, there were probably like 50. Today, we have over 1,220 groups that we
Praise
serve.
the Lord.
High school and college campuses in all 50 states.
And how many students does that represent in these groups?
That's roughly over 12,000 students a year who are involved, and that's a small average of about 10 kids per group. In many groups, we have 50 members or 30 members, and some of our newer groups, we might have 5 members. It just kind of depends on what the type of campus environment they have. We're going to train over 13,000 students this year. We've trained over 70,000 altogether in the past 12 years, and we just had 2,500 in Washington, D.C. for our national conference, which is the world's largest pro-life conference.
And so how do you fund this? I would suspect, since it's a student organization, that your funding probably comes from outside of the people you minister to.
Yeah, absolutely. Those we minister to do not support our organization because we are ministering to these students on campuses who are really the best advocates we have when it comes to exposing the abortion industry and helping women in crisis. So all of our funding is because of supporters. We're a 501c3, charitable organization, and people generously donate. People who want to see this generation take the lead and get this thing done and abolish abortion in our lifetime.
So how do people know about this in order to support it? Do you travel and minister to other people associated with the organization, travel and raise funds, or how is it that you let people know about it?
Well, a lot of people get emails for me, or they get letters, or they see us online. You can go to our website at studentsforlife.org to donate or to get more information, or just sign up for our email updates. I travel the country frequently, speaking on college campuses, speaking at pro-life galas and right to life events, any place that will let me essentially speak. We have more than 20 regional coordinators that are spread out across the country, and all they do each day is go to campuses, train student leaders to stand up for life, and have conversations with students on campuses about abortion. So they're also traveling, going to churches in their spare time, going to local right to life or pro-life events.
And so I know that we have a lot of pastors that watch this, and it may be that they would be saying, we preach and let people know that we are for life, but they might want to get some of this student groups going in their area, so they could contact you at studentsforlife.org?
Absolutely. And we actually have a youth minister guidebook that will help youth ministers talk about this issue and bring this issue up. Our staff, our regional coordinators, will come to your church and make a presentation to your youth groups. I'm actually going to be up in Erie, PA, just in about a month, speaking to a collection of churches who are now banding together in the entire area to bring this message to all of their young people, because they know they're not hearing it in the public schools. And sadly, sometimes they're not even hearing it in the Christian private schools either. So we would love to come to your church and speak to your young people, and even just mentor youth ministers or those who are working with your young people on how to bring this issue up. Often I find when I'm working with pastors, when I'm working with those within the church, there's a deep want to talk about this issue. But then there's also this deep fear of, how do I talk about this issue, knowing that there's probably students I'm talking to who've already had an abortion. And how do we deal with post-abortion syndrome? How do we equip our young people and how to have those first words when their peers are in that moment of crisis? And we can help you through all of that.
Well, Kristan, one of the things that I encounter as I deal with Christians and specifically pastors is that it's just like it's been in effect in this country for so long that they've grown accustomed to it, and they feel like that all of our efforts are useless. But one of the things that I heard you say at the event that blessed me so much, you are sharing that the millennials are actually becoming more pro-life than ever. Please share some of this information with us.
That's so right. And I think that's this big misnomer that the mainstream media and, the pro-abortion left wants to propel out there, right? That we're out of touch, that if you're pro-life, you're out of touch, you're not within the mainstream. But that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, our organization, Students for Life, released a poll of millennials, 18 to 34-year-olds, which are going to be the biggest voting bloc in America in 2020. And the poll was shocking. Even I was surprised at how good the results of this poll were. We found that students were confused about the labels. They didn't know pro-life, pro-choice. That really wasn't surprising because most students don't understand the labels. But when you ask them about Roe versus Wade, we would lose initially. And then we read 3 factual sentences to them about what Roe versus Wade actually did. After reading 3 sentences, we won. We had over 51% agree that Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton, decisions that legalized abortion in all 9 months for whatever reason, that those decisions should be reversed. It was unbelievable, the results that we saw. And this just mimics what we're seeing on the campuses time and time again. They see abortion as a human rights issue. They understand, and once you teach them and show them what an abortion actually is, they understand that abortion is violence. And it's oppressing another human person, treating another human person like your property. And so young people see that there's something wrong with that, obviously, and that there has to be another way. There has to be a different way. And so it's amazing. And often we see, like on campuses, for example, the most pro-abortion forces we encounter are often those in the administration. They're the adults. It's not the students. It's the adults, the teachers that will lead their students out to protest us. We've had lawsuits that we won. We had a lawsuit just last year in Fresno where it was a teacher who led his class out to destroy the sidewalk chalk of our pro-life group that was simply just chalking the 1-800 number for a pregnancy resource center to offer support to women. This was a teacher who did it. Now, we won that lawsuit. He had to pay $17,000 and then attend a 3-hour First Amendment free speech training, which he walked out of and then had to come back for later because the judge ordered him.
Well, I just got a email today from my representative to the U.S. House, and he was talking about the bills that they've just passed in New York and the ones they're trying to do in a lot of those northeastern countries. Yeah. And anyway, he quoted a figure saying that 75% of the U.S. population is against late-term abortions. Okay. And I think I read in some of your information that you're saying among the millennials, it's even more than that oppose a late-term abortion.
We just released 7 in 10 of millennials wanted severe restrictions on abortion. So meaning no abortion in the 2nd or 3rd trimester, no taxpayer funding for abortions. The Mars polling that's come out shows that millennials are over 73% against painful abortions after 20 weeks when a child's scientifically proven to feel pain. So in some cases, in some of these polls, millennials will actually poll more pro-life than our parents' generation.
And so here's a question from me for you. I was involved in lobbying in front of this committee this last week against this Colorado bill that is terrible. And one of the things that got me is their terminology. They make it sound like they are the ones that are for human rights. But it is absolutely shame-based. They harassed and humiliated a priest, asking him about what right does he have to speak on a sex education bill because he doesn't have sex. And it was mean-spirited. And I like the fact that you were saying that the young people are looking for a human rights issue. And I think somehow or another we've got to reverse this terminology that we're the ones that are for human rights, constitutional rights, religious rights, and somehow or another it's they've co-opted all of the right terminology.
Absolutely. And this is what they've been so effective of on college campuses, right? They use the words reproductive justice, reproductive rights. They use pro-woman, all of this language. And so we have to be just as smart when we're talking about this issue, and don't let them back you into a corner. I often hear sometimes people say, no, I'm not anti-abortion, I'm pro-life. And because the media calls us anti-abortion, the left calls us anti-abortion. And you know what? I've just started embracing it. I'm like, yes, absolutely, I'm anti-abortion. Aren't you anti-abortion?
Amen. Man, I love it. That's the way I am.
Because when you say that to someone on campus and you're like, yeah, I'm anti-abortion, and I'm like, you're telling me you're not anti-abortion? And then they don't really know what to think, because you're calling them on it. They've never had anyone affirm that in fact, I'm anti-abortion.
Yeah, are you for murdering babies?
Exactly. Just embrace it. I think sometimes we spend this time like, oh, we don't want people to know what we're against. We want people to know what we're for. I'm totally fine with someone saying I'm anti-murder. I'm anti-sex trafficking. I'm anti-tobacco use. I'm anti a lot of things. I'm anti-drunk driving. I'm also anti-abortion. And that's okay. And you know what? They don't like to use the word abortion. That's what we have to also understand, is they hate using the word abortion. In fact, top of the mind polling of millennials, when they first hear the word abortion, the top 3 words that millennials hear in their minds are death, killing, sadness. Wow. So they don't ever want the word abortion to be used.
So we need to be using it.
Yes, that's right.
Just keep saying it's the A word.
So, Kristan, we have some people watching, especially maybe some of the people from outside of the U.S. that don't even know about what was passed last week in New York and what they're tried to get through in Virginia. Could you just quickly explain what has happened?
What is happening is the political left is afraid that Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bowen are going to be reversed in our country. When Roe and Doe are reversed, what will happen is the decision of abortion will come back to every state, and every state will have to decide their own abortion laws. This is how it was pre-1973. In New York State, for the past, I think, 6 or so years, they've tried to pass this piece of legislation. They've never been able to pass it because of elections, but because of the elections this year, they got their pro-abortion majority. And the governor there actually said the reason they're going full force into passing this legislation is because they're afraid of Roe being reversed. And so what this legislation did, and it's been signed into law, allows for abortion in all 9 months for whatever reason. It allows non-doctors to actually commit abortions in the first 3 months, the first trimester. It removes criminal penalties from doctors if the baby is born alive during abortion and they don't treat that child with life-sustaining support. Because the way we commit late-term abortions in our country today, there actually is a high risk of children being born alive because they insert digoxin into the baby's heart, causing a heart attack. And then the goal is that over a course of a day, the baby dies from cardiac arrest. And then in a day or so after that, the mother delivers a dead child. So this bill was horrific. And we saw, legislator in Virginia propose a similar law, which it was dead on arrival because of elections, thankfully, in Virginia, which is interesting because Virginia was actually all the kind of estimates were that in this year, Virginia has their race, an off-year race. This year, pro-abortion Democrats were actually supposed to take control of the Senate and General Assembly there in Virginia. But because of the extremism of this bill and people rising up, I think it might have cost them at least one of the races in the state.
Praise God.
Yeah. Which will be
awesome.
Amazing.
And I heard that the Virginia bill that the governor endorsed and actually tried to promote, it actually allows a child to be born alive, and if the mother says, I don't want it, they can let it just die, which is murder. This is outside of the womb. It's not even abortion. It's how do you say that? Infanticide.
It's infanticide. And what's interesting is the governor, he's a former pediatric neurosurgeon. So this is a man who's operated on children, who's been tasked with saving the lives of children throughout his career, admitting on public radio that not only did he support this bill, but if it were to happen that a child would be born during these late-term abortions, that then a conversation would have to ensue. I mean, this is unbelievable. And in fact, the delegate who proposed this legislation, I was reading something yesterday, actually, the legislation, she proposed legislation, this late-term abortion legislation. She actually proposed legislation helping to save some sort of butterfly. Like, it was crazy. Like, she was putting more emphasis on the life of bugs than she was these 9-month-old babies in the womb. And so it just, I think what we were talking about, Andrew, before is, I think this is actually going to be a good thing. As horrendous as this legislation is, I think it shows America what the pro-abortion movement really is about.
Where they're going.
And they're so afraid, they're running scared, and so they're pulling back the curtain, and they're really showing the rest of America what they're really about, which is abortion for whatever reason, in all 9 months of pregnancy and even after. That's a logical conclusion of abortion, because there is no difference between the child who's residing within the mother at 9 months and the baby who's just been born. And actually, medical ethicists, there was an article just a couple of years ago in one of the British medical journals, actually ethicists arguing that there really was no difference and that they should be calling for infanticide because it's the same as a late-term abortion. I mean, this is where we are. And so I actually think this is, as shocking as it is, I think it's good because we don't like to talk about abortion in America. I'm like the worst person to invite to a dinner party because I talk about like everything you're not supposed to talk about because it's hidden, right? Like, abortion happens behind the Planned Parenthood closed doors. You don't see it. Like, we don't turn on the evening news every night and see the broken bodies of 2,800 children. If we turned on the news every night and saw 2,800 Americans dead, burned alive, chopped apart, every single American would be demanding that we put an end to this. No matter what was happening in Washington, no matter what the other issues were, that would take priority. But because abortion's happening behind those closed doors, we just lose sight of the goal.
I agree with you. I think that ultimately this is good, not in the sense that they're doing this, but they were doing this all along, but they were just hiding it. They were projecting that we are here to service women and help women, and it's all a lie. And now they have had to come out and make a frontal attack because they do see the possibility of Roe versus Wade being overturned.
That's right. That's right. And I think anytime, your opponent feels backed into a corner and they start lashing out and going to their extremes, they're going to lose because they're not thinking strategically.
All right. So, Kristan, could you also explain, you would be better at this than I am, how Roe versus Wade could be overcome? Because there's a lot of people that, again, it's just the law of the land. This is what the Supreme Court has said, and they don't think it can be overturned. So please explain to everybody how that happens.
Well, I'm sure Richard, the lawyer, will have some feedback for me. But yes,
I'm taking notes. Be careful, Kristan.
But I definitely think that, I was just in a meeting a couple of weeks ago in Washington about, the question came up about Roe's overturn, and there are varying opinions from pro-life legal scholars about how could Roe be overturned, because it really is a behemoth of law. And we know the Supreme Court hates to reverse itself, right? Because that would be the Supreme Court admitting that it made a mistake and that it was wrong. There's some legislation that's been passed in states that's been challenged by the pro-abortion left that we're actually waiting on to see if the Supreme Court, there's a Louisiana law right now that we're waiting on to see if the Supreme Court will accept the case. If they don't and they let the Louisiana law go into effect, some on the left believe that that's the beginning of the end of Roe versus Wade. I'm not as hopeful of it, but I definitely think it's coming. So I don't know if it's going to be a gradual chipping away or if it's going to be one fell swoop. I do know we definitely need to get another pro-life justice on the Supreme Court bench. Right now, we believe we have 5 pro-life Supreme Court justices. I think the challenge is 2 of those justices don't like to make waves. And so they're not going to want to be the fifth vote. So when we're talking about the 2020 presidential election, this is going to be key, because we need 6 or 7 votes in the Supreme Court to vote to overturn Roe. So it's not a 5-4 decision. I think, what we might have seen in America here with the Judge Kavanaugh judicial confirmation hearings, the Senate Judiciary Confirmation hearings, and all the chaos that ensued in Washington, D.C., I think that was absolutely nothing compared to what is coming for when the next seat is open. So I'm not sure which way they're going to do it, if it's going to be kind of this piecemeal thing, which I think is probably more realistic rather than like one fell swoop. What I do know, what we've actually started organizing for at Students for Life, is that day, to be that post-Roe organization. In fact, we launched a 501c4 organization last week, which is a political organization just so we can get students out to state capitals. And because really we know we have to have an army of people ready to go, because the day Roe falls and the decision goes back to states, we go from having one fight in Washington, D.C. to 50 simultaneous fights in every state capital. So every single one of us is going to be required to be there on the ground and to make sure our states become abortion free. And so that's what we've been training our students on. And so, there's already trigger law legislation that's starting to get passed. That's why New York passed this law. Rhode Island's going to pass a similar one. Vermont, I just got an email on earlier this evening. Maryland's going to pass a law. Illinois passed one last term. So the most pro-abortion states want to shore up that abortion will be legal once Roe falls. So we certainly need to start going to states and making abortion illegal when Roe falls.
And I heard that New York has said that they were going to export this legislation to as many states as they possibly could.
Yeah,
so
and Rhode Island's already had a hearing on similar legislation. Like I said, Vermont's I just got an email tonight about Vermont's legislation. So they're going to try to get this to as many states as they can. This is one of their weaknesses that they've identified. Last year, a Reproductive Healthcare Investors Alliance, which was basically a front for all the big donors to the abortion industry. It was a report on the strengths and the weaknesses and the opportunities of the pro-abortion movement. And it's very clear, page 2 said what their mission was: to increase the supply and the demand of contraception and abortion. And they went through all of their strengths and weaknesses, and then one of their biggest perceived weaknesses that they've identified was the lack of state legislation. Because the reality is we've been winning in states for the past decade. There's been more than 300 pieces of pro-life legislation that's been passed. And so what you're really seeing is the other side's really trying to catch up. I was talking to our students at our conference, and I kind of talked about how this is like the real life tortoise and the hare kind of race. We homeschool our house, so we teach all of our kids fables. And so my boys were learning about tortoise and the hare not too long ago. And I was kind of thinking about, because when I think about how our pro-life movement got started in 1973, when the Supreme Court handed down this decision, everyone was kind of shocked. They didn't know where it was coming from. We were kind of like this tortoise that didn't really know. We were very slow moving to get started. The hare took off. Planned Parenthood was already set up. But they got cocky. They really got cocky, especially in the 1990s. They had President Clinton, who vetoed twice partial birth abortion ban legislation. They just kind of got lazy. And so, but our movement, we didn't stop to take a nap like the hare did. We just kept trucking along. We kept moving along. And so when you look at the 2000s, we started to make these advances. Poll numbers started to change. We had state legislatures really starting to step up in Washington, D.C.'s void. And so really what I think is happening is the hare has woken up. He's realized the tortoise is on its way to the final destination to win the race. And the hare is giving it everything he has to stop us.
Well, back in 1973, I wasn't aware that they had even passed Roe versus Wade. It was just totally under the radar. And Mike Ferris with the ADF, he said that 9 people in black robes basically forced this against the will of the American people. And so It's been the court system that basically has been passing immorality against the wish of the majority of people. And now that the liberals see that the Supreme Court is changing, and not only the Supreme Court, but there's been, 80 appellate judges that Trump has gotten confirmed, and another 100 and something in the pipeline. I think they see the handwriting on the wall, just like you were saying, Kristan, and that's the reason that they are doing this, which in a way is a reason for us to celebrate, because Roe versus Wade could actually be overcome in the very near future. And let me say one other thing, and then I'd like your comment on this, and if I've got it wrong, let me know. But like the heartbeat bill that was passed and stuff, if it makes it up to the Supreme Court, I've been told that they probably won't reverse Roe versus Wade. What they'll do is kick it back to the states, so that every individual state can establish their own laws, which when Roe versus Wade was passed, they basically took it away from the states and made it a federal law. And so they could take the shackles off of the states and free us up.
You're right. I actually think that's, when you look at conservative legal scholars and conservative justices, they're less inclined to make these sweeping rules for everybody. Liberal justices tend to not care about the institution and what historically has been done, and they'll just do what they need to do to impose their ideology, where conservative legal scholars and justices are going to act differently. And so absolutely, that is why we have to organize. And this is why we launched our Students for Life action last week, because it's all about the state action. So much, I think a lot of times when we talk about politics, we focus on what's happening in Washington, D.C. But the states are where it's going to be at. The states are how we're going to abolish abortion, state by state.
And this leads us to another point, that the vast majority of people only vote in the presidential elections every 4 years. They are not involved in their state and in their local governments, and yet this is where the battle is going to be won. And so we've got to start turning people out to get involved in every bit of government, not just federal elections.
That's right. It's absolutely right. I struggled a lot with the 2016 election with a lot of millennials. Obviously, we're winning and gaining ground when it comes to our issue of abortion with millennials, but in many respects, millennials are very liberal on a lot of policy issues. They're the least church generation, and they don't actually agree with Republicans on many issues. In fact, they don't even like the Republican brand. But this is the issue. The pro-life issue is the way you can actually win them over. And so I had a lot of heart-to-heart conversations with students who, didn't agree with conservative policies, but then felt like they had to vote for the conservative race because of abortion. And I think that's important. When you saw in the 2018 election, we kind of fought back against this a little bit with the event. There were these evangelical pastors that came out who said, there's no single issue when you're voting. There's all these issues that matter. Education's a pro-life issue, and all this other stuff. And really what the crux of all that was to take away voters who would vote Republican because of the issue of abortion. And that was a very calculated decision, because they didn't want Christians voting in bloc. They wanted to, basically fray the Christian vote. And I think it's really important, pastors and youth pastors as Christians, we continue to talk about why it's okay to be a single issue voter. This is the world's greatest human rights tragedy we've ever known. No other issue kills more people every single day. No other thing kills more people every single day than abortion. Of course, it has to be our number one. How can you even think of a politician or elected official who's wrong on this issue? How can you trust their judgment on any other issue? If they believe killing a 9-month-old baby in the womb is a moral right, then how can you trust them on any other issue?
And I just heard that the number one cause of death last year in the world was abortion.
Oh, yeah.
That's terrible. And like Doug Lamborn said, our congressman, if 75% of the United States population is against late-term abortion, I don't know any other issue that shares that type of
true.
view. We ought to capitalize on this and make it the point of the spear to press against all of this evil. And I believe that other things would, the LGBTQ issues and all of these kind of things, if we could deal with abortion, I think it'd deal a death blow to all of those things.
Absolutely.
I absolutely do. I think it starts the conversation, especially with a lot of confused millennials, about why is human life valuable and what is the dignity of the human person. And the easiest way to start that conversation is to talk about abortion, because they've seen their brothers and sisters in the womb via ultrasound. They know that those tired old talking points of it's just a blob of tissue, they know they don't add up. And so there's a lot of work, especially when we're talking about even young millennials, young evangelical millennials, young Catholic millennials. There's a lot of work we have to do on a lot of different issues, but we can find common ground and we can start the conversation when it comes to abortion. And the thing to remember too is, our polls showed that only 7% of millennials were actually in line with the Democratic National Committee's platform of abortion, which most people have no idea what the DNC's platform of abortion is, but it calls for abortion in all 9 months for whatever reason and taxpayer funded. So they are the extremists, not us. And I think that was one of the things that was so pivotal in the 2016 election when President Trump called Hillary Clinton out on her abortion extremism. There was a lot of people like me who I wasn't real sure, could we trust Donald Trump? Would he actually be a pro-life president? And when he did that on national TV, he called her out and said, you are for killing a baby in all 9 months, even until the moment the baby's born. And she had nothing to say.
Amen.
He'll fight for us.
Well, Kristan, we could keep talking about this for a long time, but we do want to give our viewers an opportunity to ask some questions here. So if we got any questions?
We do. We've got a lot of questions coming in. This is definitely an important topic to our viewers. So Michael on chat asked this: when you have doctors who are governors of states that gives the mother a right to kill her child even after the child is born, how do you fight this?
Mm-hmm. Well, we fight it the way we're fighting in Richmond right now. We've had a rally on Saturday. We've got a rally at the governor's mansion this Thursday. We're just not going to be silent. We refuse to shut up about it. We're going to continue to talk about it. And I think that's one of the most important things, that we as Christians, we know what the truth is and we can't hide it under that bushel, right? Mm-hmm. We have to keep proclaiming the truth. Even when everyone's saying, oh, don't talk about this anymore, or you've been talking about this for too long. We continue to proclaim the truth.
Let me add to this that this last week I testified in front of this committee, and one of the things that I did was to see the 4 Republicans who stood up against this ungodliness, and they are just treated like scum by the liberals. And so one of the things I did was reach out and call my representative, and I think if I'd have been talking to him face to face, he would have hugged me.
Yeah.
It blessed him to find out that there was people supporting him. So that's one thing we can do. Plus, I'm in the process of getting all of the names of these liberals who are pushing this thing through, and I'm contacting the pastors that are in the cities that they represent. And I have personal friends, like one of them has been a friend with me for 40 years that's in the district of this transgender representative that pushed these things. And I'm mobilizing him to get that guy out of office. And they will listen to that. If they know that there is public opposition and it's going to cost them votes, I think that we could swing some of the people who may be marginal or soft, they call it. And that's one of the things we can do.
In Virginia, what we're going to do, we launched the C4 on Friday. I'm going to go around. There's all of these new freshman delegates. I'm going to go to every single church in their district and make sure that every Christian knows what they did.
Amen.
Very good.
Amen.
Wow.
Go for it, girl. I'm
Yeah.
with you.
I'm to Colorado next.
Yeah, it's awesome. All right, this is from guest 3197. And this person says, I thought I heard in a constitutional program that at the time of Roe versus Wade, that either Justice Rehnquist or White said in a dissenting opinion that if it could ever be proved when life began, when a heartbeat could be detected, then Roe versus Wade would be null and void. Are you aware of this?
Yeah, I remember I've read it before in the dissent. It was when life begins. What the court did was punt when life begins, and they said that it was a philosophical and scientific issue, and they weren't philosophers and they weren't scientists. And so there has been that case over and over again, if we can prove when life begins. But
I did hear the actual, I read the wording on it, and it says if it could be proven that it was a life in the womb, then it's entitled to all of the constitutional protection that any other life would be.
Yeah.
So that is a way to overturn it. But again, everybody I've talked to doesn't think that it would literally void Roe versus Wade. They just kick it back to the states.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. That's what most people think. I also think you have to, the question is it a human and then is it a person, or actually two separate questions? And so when we're on campuses a lot, we can get students to admit it's a human, but they won't admit that the fetus is a person. And so that's actually, there's a broader question too of when do you get your personhood rights? And the Supreme Court has a ghastly history of determining someone's personhood. If you all remember when they said that Americans were only 3/5 persons. And so that's actually, when we're on campuses, that's really the debate that comes down to is people will, students will try to argue it's not human. And I'm like, okay, well, let's pull up Google and I can show them in 5 seconds it's a human. It is a human. And then the argument always comes down to, and what it always whittles down to is, okay, but it's a human, but it doesn't have rights. It's not a person like you and I are persons.
Richard made a great point on this today as we were driving, and he said, if finding a little microscopic something on Mars would constitute life, then how could you not say that a child in a mother's womb isn't life?
Yeah.
That's right. Well, you think about, at the end of the day, it's an ideology.
Right.
And advancing abortion on demand is an ideology. So it doesn't matter for some people how much you can prove to them that they're actually against science. They are the anti-science movement, not us.
And I really believe that this goes deeper than just the issue of abortion. What it is, it's actually light versus dark.
It is.
Yeah.
And darkness hates light because it makes its deeds evil, is what Jesus said. And whether these people even know it or not, they are fighting everything that is moral because it shines a light on their sin.
One of the things.
And also you have to think about, too, the root of abortion. And I know this isn't always a very popular thing to bring up, but why we have abortion is because we have contraception. Once sex was taken outside of marriage, outside of that committed relationship, once contraception was brought into the relationship, abortion had to be presented because contraception was never 100% foolproof. And so it's this contraceptive mentality that we've created. And that's honestly, and when I say this to churches, Andrew, like I'll say this in front of a church and I'll get half the church's eyes start to kind of pop out of their sockets because
because half of them are having sex outside of marriage.
And we as Christians haven't talked to ourselves about this issue and what was sex designed for, and what is contraception? Why was contraception introduced? Because the Protestant churches were against contraception until a couple of decades ago. Then all of a sudden it became this thing. And so now we're looking at it and we're trying to work our way backwards. But there's really a root of this issue. And that's where we're seeing all of it. And it's so frustrating, especially when we're talking to Christians who just have never even put the two together.
And you can go back to Planned Parenthood roots where Margaret Sanger was a eugenics person, and she was out to eliminate the black population. She called them weeds that needed to be exterminated.
That's exactly right.
And we've now given them nearly $500 million per year from the government to help them abort. Richard?
It's interesting that the governor of Virginia who supported that bill, it just came out a couple days ago that in his yearbook, His
Oh,
high school yearbook,
the irony is rich.
there's a photo of him in blackface standing next to a classmate. There's some party who's in a KKK outfit.
The hypocrisy of these people is unbelievable.
It's amazing, isn't it?
And then Planned Parenthood came out condemning him for being a racist. And I was like, your founder literally spoke at female KKK rallies. But no one's talking about that.
Margaret Sanger was evil and Hitler was her hero.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's take another question here. This has been a hot topic. I sure appreciate you sharing. I appreciate your attitude, Kristan.
It's
awesome.
great. All right, this is from Gary, and he says, do you know anything about the United Nations plan to push the New York type of law?
I don't know anything about the United Nations plan to push the New York law. I wouldn't be surprised. The United Nations has a concerted effort, and they've had a concerted effort for a number of years to push abortion on all countries across the globe and call abortion a human right. That's why you'll see that President Trump and then Ambassador Nikki Haley pulled us out of the UN Populations Fund because of their severe abortion agenda. I know, like, when countries like Kenya were rewriting their constitution, it was us, the taxpayers, that actually gave Kenya money under the agreement that they included abortion in their new constitution. And so it's not just the UN, it's also our U.S. State Department.
Well, we just happen to have our resident lawyer who does know some about this UN sex education thing. So, Richard, you address that.
Well, the UN is very pro-abortion, and the abortion lobby, Planned Parenthood, is extremely influential in the UN. We think of Planned Parenthood as being a United States organization, but it's actually a worldwide lobby. And that's where they're pushing their agenda from. And this little battle that we've got in Colorado on the sex education bill is coming out of the UN. And a core part of it is there's a gag rule in it on teachers that you can't express an opinion on whether abortion is a good idea or a bad idea. And they have to teach them about abortion as a possible pregnancy outcome. So these two things, this sex ed, you mentioned earlier, Kristan, something fascinating, that they want to increase the demand and the supply for contraception. They're pushing this sex ed bill because they know that it will result in a higher demand for abortions, and that's
right.
their money.
And it's right there in the reports.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. They actually put that in the report.
Boy, talk about evil. That's evil.
And Richard sent out an email that actually had some of the curriculum from the United Nations thing, and it actually shows pictures, not photographs, but drawings of male and female so that you become familiar with the parts, and teaches techniques how homosexuals have sex, how you have oral and anal sex so that you can keep from being pregnant, and it presents it as sex, as an accepted method of sex. And the wording between the UN bill and the Colorado bill is nearly the same.
Yeah, it's the same.
We haven't been able to establish a direct link, but the wording.
Their fingerprints are all over it.
That's right. It's just terrible.
Richard, do you have information on that on the website?
No, we don't yet, but we'll get it there this week.
Okay, great. Because if it's starting to affect other states.
And all of these things that we're talking about, if you go to truthandliberty.net, we've got a wealth of information on this. Plus, you can see the archive of this exact broadcast. And Kristan, I think you've done a great job giving us a lot of information.
Yes.
So for those of you who are watching and saying, man, this is information overload, how do I assimilate this? You can go back and watch it again.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, this is from Kristan on chat. And she says, how would you respond to someone that is opposed to the abolishment of abortion because they state it puts women at risk of losing their life if they were having an ectopic pregnancy or a tubal pregnancy and aren't able to receive treatment to remove the embryo or baby from the fallopian tube?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think there's any pro-life legislator or pro-life activist in the country who believes that ending abortion means putting women's life at risk by not allowing a tubal pregnancy to be removed. That's not what we're talking about when you're talking about making abortion illegal. There's always an exception in any pro-life law that's written for the life of the mother. That's what you'd be talking about when we're talking about a situation of a tubal pregnancy where the embryo has to be removed from the mother's fallopian tube or it can rupture and the mother can bleed to death and die.
But Kristan, if I'm not mistaken, I've also heard that there is less than 1% of all abortions that have anything to do with rape, incest, the life of the mother, any of this. And if you just look at that one health issue of saving the life of the mother, it's just a very, very small number of people.
That's absolutely right. And this is what happens all the time when we're on campuses and we're debating this issue of abortion. People will say, well, what about rape? What about incest? What about life of the mother? And often I'll say, look, okay, let's agree. I don't agree that abortion should be legal in the cases of rape, but for the sake of argument, I'll agree with you that fine, leave abortion legal from that 1% to 3%. Would you stand with me to abolish all 97% of abortions? And then the person will go back and say, well, what about this? Because ultimately what we hear when we hear this argument, it's not about the issue that's been presented to you. Sadly, it's not about the cases of rape where a mother does become pregnant, the 5 to 10% of cases of sexual assault when the mother does become pregnant because of the sexual assault, or the rare cases that a mother's life is in danger because of carrying that child. What often we hear this as kind of an excuse for why abortion should be legal in all 9 months for any reason. But there isn't any pro-life law that's out there that doesn't allow for an abortion if the mother's life is at risk and at danger. I think when you're talking, I have a lot of friends who are OBGYNs, and some are former abortionists, now are pro-life OBGYNs. And I often talk to them, like, what do you do when you have these high-risk pregnancies? And my good friend, Dr. Brashowski, who's a former abortionist, talks about how, you have to understand that you have two patients as a pro-life OBGYN. You have the mother and then you have the child. And as long as you keep that in mind during the entire pregnancy, that you're treating two unique human beings, you're going to be okay. It's when you stop acknowledging one, that's when there start to become moral issues, that there's only one patient. And so there isn't any pro-life laws that you have to be worried about when abortion's made illegal, that women who are having a tubal pregnancy aren't going to be able to have the embryo removed. And that's not an issue of concern because there is no legislation.
But again, this goes back to the ignorance of most of us as Christians, that we hear something like that and we think, well, yes, if the life of the mother is at risk, but that is such a small fraction, and they have acted like that is 50% of the cases, and it's not. Abortion is all about killing the child because you aren't ready, because it's financially going to be a burden or whatever, or because you're using abortion as birth control.
And they try to make the argument in New York that the reason we need late-term abortions is because these are rare medical cases. But even Guttmacher Institute acknowledges the majority of late-term abortions are not because of fetal abnormalities or fetal issues. And by the way, when does killing a child, creating an environment where you're causing a child to have a heart attack mean that you're being merciful to that child?
Right.
It's the same spirit behind euthanasia.
Unbelievable. Like my children I have 2 children with cystic fibrosis, and 90% of children who are diagnosed in the womb with CF are killed. And it's considered mercy, and it's unbelievable. I have 2 amazing human beings walking on this earth who I want to make saints in heaven for the glory of God. They did not deserve to be killed in my womb because of their genetic diagnosis.
Well, Kristan, I hate to interrupt you, but we have 50 seconds left. I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for what you're doing. And again, give out your website, tell people that they can support you financially, invite you to their church, etc.
That's right. Go to studentsforlife.org. You can hit the green button to donate. You can sign up for our email list, or just email me at info@studentsforlife.org. If you have questions, if you want me to come speak or have one of our staff come speak to your church, we would love to help get this conversation started.
Amen. And so, again, thank you, Kristan. And we want to encourage all of you watching, please take advantage of the archive. Tell other people about this. Tell them that they can go and look this up, and you can send it to other people or send them to our website. But praise God, I believe that the tide has turned, the sleeping giant is awake, and praise God, we're going to see an end to this. God bless you. We'll see you again next week.
Amen.
Join us next time for the Truth and Liberty broadcast. Find tonight's episode and related articles and links at truthandliberty.net.